We will now begin the August 2016 edition of the Sustainable Material Management Web Academy. We're happy to have you participating. This 90-minute webinar is hosted by U.S. EPA to provide training and networking opportunities to state and local governments, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders interested in sustainable materials management. For today's webinar, we will be using a slightly different formatted, hosted by Keith Harrison as our moderator from the Recycling Partnership. They will be highlighting their recent work in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We will also hear from Patrick Mallow from Republic Services as a municipal waste hauler, Janice Paré from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, as well as Gunther Wellenstein from the City of Lowell and Greg Smith from the Town of Needham, both located in Massachusetts. I've had the pleasure to work with both Massachusetts state and municipal governments, and I look forward to hearing their presentations. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so please type in your questions to the box. So moving into today's webinar, please note our disclaimer, and we will now begin our presentation. Keith, I'm turning the presentation over to you. Keith Harrison, the Executive Director of the Recycling Partnership.
Excellent. All right, I'm going through this. I'm going to get my stuff up here, and you guys tell me when you see my presentation screen.
We're all set.
Good. All right, thanks very much. So hello everyone, I'm Keith Harrison. I'm the Executive Director of the Recycling Partnership, and we're very happy to be with you today. Today we're talking about tools and resources to overcome contamination problems. And we're going to focus on case examples through our partners with the Massachusetts, with both the state and local communities in Massachusetts who helped us pilot the resources that will be debuting at the end of today's presentation. So your goal for today is to dig in and hear real-life examples of how these communities have been addressing reducing contamination and increasing participation in their community, and then at the end, open up the newly released, today is the grand debut of our newly released resources, all designed to help you have the same success that they are. But before we get into that, let's stop for a second and talk about what is contamination. Contamination is money thrown away, in short, and that's why it's such a big topic today. Many people are talking about how do we get more better recycling happening. So we want to get more, increase the amount of recycling, and then better. So we want to have better recycling coming through the system so that your contract as a community is maintained in the best way possible through a relationship with the MRF who has as little residue as possible. And the whole goal is getting more recycling through the system and back into manufacturing. So whether you're single stream, dual stream, or a combination, bins, carts, or drop-off, there are many opportunities that you can take to reduce contamination, which will help your bottom line, and even better than that, what we'll find today, really engage your citizens, helping them build trust in your program, excitement that they have in the opportunity that's provided to them as a citizen in your town. So we have a couple of good speakers here today, and I would like to, I'd like to have everyone check in so you can hear their voices. I think we might be down one speaker, though, which is unfortunate. It seems like Greg might be having some technical difficulties, but let's check. Greg, are you out there? Okay, no problem. Jason Hale, who's on staff, will be filling in, and if we get lucky and Greg gets to make it through the system, we'll hear from him directly. Gunther, why don't you say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the opportunity. I like the theme here, more, better. City of Lowell is about 40 miles north of Boston. We manage a single stream automated collection for 25,000 households, and we've been challenged by Waste Management to do more better.
All right, very good. Janice, why don't you say hello?
Hello, my name is Janice Paré. I work in the Municipal Waste Reduction Branch at Mass DEP, and I manage this project from the Mass DEP side of things. We're working very closely with the Recycling Partnership and the other pilot communities.
Excellent. And Patrick, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, hi, this is Patrick Mello. I'm with Republic Services. We are, holler. We're partnered with our communities that have contracts to, help them reduce contamination, increase recycling, and, help them any way we can.
Excellent. We're very glad to have you on. And Jason, let's hear your voice too.
Oh yeah, howdy folks. Jason Hale with the Recycling Partnership, and apparently I might also be a poor substitute for Greg Smith from Needham today, but glad to be here, glad you're here, and we'll have some fun.
Wonderful. So today, as I said, we're debuting our brand new resources, open source, free to you, all download, both the protocol, that means the methodology on the operational side, as well as the eye candy, so the designs that people look for to help communicate with the public. And our guest today will help us dig into how we designed them together, retooled them, we've measured, refined, and we'll continue to do this work in Massachusetts. But Janice, why don't you give us a little bit of background of what got us to where we are today?
Okay, so the genesis of the project really dates back to 2014 when a mandatory recycling enforcement coordinator in the city of Lowell identified a contamination problem in the single stream recycling bins. He saw it while he was lifting lids on his routes, and he brought the issue to the attention of Gunther and Mass DEP. Like I said, on-the-street observations is really what served as the catalyst for the creation of a stakeholder group that was brought together by Mass DEP in partnership with EPA. And the stakeholders were MRF operators, haulers, and recycling coordinators. And over the course of about a year and a half, they have met 6 times to discuss the issue of contamination in the recycling stream. One of the takeaways from the stakeholder meetings was that contamination, MRF operators said, has resulted in decreased efficiency, and it also puts worker safety at risk. That, coupled with record low commodity prices, contamination has become a costly issue for MRF operators, and eventually those costs are going to be reflected in recycling tip fees. Another important piece that came from the stakeholder meetings was that Mass DEP agreed to do a public recycling survey to try to better understand public awareness and recycling behavior. So in early summer of 2015, a market research firm conducted a blind survey with a representative sample of Massachusetts residents. And just as an aside, the last survey that we did was in 2005, so this was sort of long overdue. And there were a lot of interesting findings from the survey. If you're interested in seeing those results, I believe it's posted on our website. If not now, then very soon. It's been a little bit of reshuffling of things, but it should be back. But important points relevant to the issue of contamination were the findings related to, quote, recycling knowledge. So there were a few questions related to that, and the survey found that when asked about what materials are acceptable for recycling in the household bin or curbside, only 10% of respondents could be characterized as all or mostly correct. And that's interesting because 77% of respondents strongly agreed with the statement, I know what I can put in my bin, I know what I can't put in my bin. So the data essentially show that there's a gap between what people thought was recyclable curbside and what actually is recyclable curbside. It also showed that respondents were particularly confused by acceptable plastics, which makes sense because unacceptable plastics make up a very large chunk of the contamination found in recycling bins. So while Massachusetts residents are actively and enthusiastically recycling, it's clear that in order to reduce contamination, we need them to modify their behavior. And to do that, they need to understand and better what we mean by contamination. So with that in mind, when Brooke Nash saw Keith Harrison present at the NERC conference back in 2015, it was sort of like a nice, you know, all of these events sort of converging at the same time. She ran up to Keith and introduced herself, and basically at that point planted the seeds for this statewide project, which began in earnest in February 2016 with our first webinar. Brooke likes to say that we all, MRF operators, haulers, cities, towns, and the state, have, quote, skin in the game, because the recycling collection and processing infrastructure exists today because state and local governments, along with private industry, invested and built it. And therefore, it's an investment that we all have an interest in protecting. So thus, this project. And Mass DEP's main goal is to see a reduction in contamination in the recycling stream that does not negatively impact recycling participation. Our first objective was to develop pilot studies in drop-off and curbside communities to test the effectiveness of the tools developed by TRP that you'll hear about on this webinar. But now we're on to our next objective, which is to work with TRP to finalize the toolkit and best management practices, and to very importantly, train the facilitators who will be working directly with the cities and towns across the state to help them implement the tools and best practices that we've come up with. So Mass DEP has 7 regional municipal assistance coordinators, or MACs, who will take on that role as facilitators. The MACs have helped tremendously on the ground with the pilot communities, and they will continue to help roll out the program to other communities going forward. So it's very exciting times.
Excellent. That's very good, Janice. And I had a question about what's that website for the survey results? Can you rattle that off for us?
I might have to do that after the fact. If you want to Google it, it would be Mass DEP. I'll have to find out. I think
okay.
what I Googled was not fruitful, so hopefully I can find something better.
Sure, and we'll be happy to redirect people afterwards. So if it's not clear, just reach out to any of us afterwards, and we'll get that to you. So I've seen from a couple people that you are having some trouble seeing the right screen right now. You should see a map up, and it seems like most of you are. So so thanks for that good overview, Janice. That was a really beautiful description of how we love, as the Recycling Partnership, to work with partners both at the city, a regional, or a state level to make change that's right for the community and or right for the region. And we will, these tools that we're debuting today are designed to do that. But before we dig into the findings of these initial pilots, I think it's important to take a second and just lay out some groundwork. Jason's going to help me here. We're going to play a little bit of verbal ping pong, and we're going to go through what we know about recycling, both increasing participation and reducing contamination. And so these are kind of the ground rules from here on out. So what do we know? We can't only educate. If this was as simple as educating the public, we wouldn't have a contamination problem, and we'd have really high participation rates. So awareness and knowledge alone does not change the system.
Yeah, Keith, good point. And what we do know is that operations plus education is the real trick to getting the gold. And I'm saying getting the gold since you said ping pong, and I sit in the Olympics now, so I'm really excited. But you need to do both. And you can picture it, folks. If you tell people, go recycle all these great things, but you don't give them a bin or a cart, they can't really do it. You need both, and you need to make improvements to both and have them work hand in hand.
Excellent. And we also know that many people feel like they're recycling, right? Janice just pointed this out. This study that they have is terrific because it points out that everyone thinks they're doing it the right way, and but they aren't always doing that. Is that true?
Yeah, and Mass DEP's study on this was fantastic. It very much confirms that a lot of people think they're doing well, but they're not. And to reach them, a key is simple instructions, giving people the right level of information to hit their listening. And so not just assuming they know what they're doing and not bombarding them with a host of everything you'd ever want someone to know, but just the basics to be sure that you're getting the behavior you want.
Excellent. So here's another ringer, and this was a huge finding from the Massachusetts study, is that while teaching the children is always important, we must begin with childhood education, the importance of reduce, reuse, and recycle, that we can't solve problems in a community like contamination by teaching the children, that's one of many components that must be in place.
Yeah, Keith, and that's another one that the Mass DEP study confirmed for us. A lot of recycling programs double down on teaching the children, so they're building that next generation of recycler, and I think we can all get behind that. But for immediate behavior change, really, in the end, you need to go after everybody because ultimately, and the Mass DEP numbers showed this, most people aren't as heavily influenced in the home, their behavior by kids as you would think. And so with something like contamination, you really want, you really need fast action and fast change. And so you got to go after everybody, build that awareness of what you do and don't want, build that understanding, then help trigger the right behaviors and really get through to your audience as quickly as you can.
Excellent. And so this all comes down, as Jason said, to the marriage between communications and operations. So if communications is talking to the public about how they engage with the system, operations is what the system is. It's the cart or bin or bag that they use to take recyclables from their house and put it away or put it outside so that it goes to where it's headed, or it's the drop-off center. So with that sort of operations, there are contracts, routes, haulers, drivers, and sometimes enforcement. And enforcement means walking the walk in as much as talking the talk. So as we're going to talk today, reinforcing to the public that they can't just put anything in the bin, but they need to put the right things in the bin so that they have confidence that the recycling system is working for them.
Yeah, Keith, I mean, you described it well, and that's why you need to give residents very specific feedback at the curb, or at a drop-off center, give them very specific feedback as they're approaching the drop-off center or putting their materials in. And you couple that awareness messaging and any behavioral triggers with that specific personalized feedback to make sure the message gets through and to make sure that they're not caught unaware. And you can picture it like if the road you take to drive to work every day was always 45 miles an hour, and all of a sudden it's 35 miles an hour, but nobody posted a sign and nobody told you, and there was no way that you could possibly know that, and then you got a ticket, you'd be pretty ticked. But if you knew about it, or if you got a warning ticket, or if they changed the sign and maybe put up a little flashing beacon around it, well, then you probably wouldn't be as upset. You might be upset you had the ticket, but it'd be more understandable. So we just don't want to disenfranchise people. We need to be reasonable and recognize what people would reasonably know and not know.
But we've got some great data to show you that you shouldn't be afraid of having that sort of strong interaction with the public. That's what this study is all about today. So two more facts of groundwork of what we know if we're going to take this on. That if the public is confused, they're not going to know how to engage, and they'll either put it all in, those are wish cyclers, or give up and do nothing. And so as packaging involves and the rules involved of what to do, how to do it, and how to engage, the public will remain confused. And the number one thing we can begin by doing is reducing that confusion so that we bolster confidence.
Yeah, and I mean, it's no wonder people are confused. You look at how much the material stream, the recycling stream is changing, you look how much packaging is changing over time. Even professional recyclers get confused. Wait, caps on, caps off, pizza boxes, how do you clean them? How clean is clean? Of course, just a Johnny resident's going to be fairly confused. So consistency helps with that. And one way I like to think about this is if I work in one town, live in a second town, and play in a volleyball league in a third, and all three of those towns go to the same MRF but talk about their streams differently and say what they accept in different terms using different images, it's going to leave me pretty befuddled. And I can get easily befuddled, but still, it's going to leave me pretty befuddled. And so trying to create a common list across MRF sheds is a real trick to keeping residents on target.
Good. So finally, last one here is that we can educate all we want. But it comes down to the convenience of recycling, that it's as easy to do as throwing something away, and that it's relevant to people. And that's what begins to drive their interest in participating with the system. And we at the Recycling Partnership and MassDEP agrees that guilt is never a good way to drive participation.
Yeah, long-term behavior change and maintaining that behavior, positive feelings are really what keeps people there. Now, fighting contamination or any other very short-term issue, you can go a little negative. But the short of it, really a lot of it is educating to the right level with your audience and making sure they understand what's going on and the messages reaching them at the right time and with the right feel. And so we really took that to heart, and we use that to build out a model that we're proving out right now in partnership with MassDEP. Excellent.
That's true. So with all that in mind, let's start to dig into what is it. So if we know what it isn't, if we know we have a problem of increasing participation, reducing contamination, and we know those things that we just rattled through are true, then what's next? Jason, drill in a little bit further here.
Yeah. So here are the building blocks of what we built. And basically, we started with some branding and campaign messaging based on all that we know and just talked about. So we decided to go energetic, relatable, kind of a recycling as part of everyday life approach. So instead of the old have somebody looking at the camera and smiling as they drop the aluminum can into the cart or bin, we wanted to go with something that was maybe a little more relatable for folks. Something they could say, I played basketball. I was a kid with dreams once. Or maybe still am. Or I could see having breakfast with my family and the orange juice. But bright, happy, energetic taglines. Engaging colors. And as you can see from the material list, kind of down to the bottom right, simplified, streamlined material lists that have images, but also have icons available for where that's appropriate. Very clean names of what is and is not acceptable. Extraordinarily simple instructions. And a lot of modularity, so you can mix and match pieces, almost like if you had a closet where every item matched every other item reasonably well, so you could basically have kind of maximum reach. So that's where we started, and then where did we go from there? Okay, there we formed a model. You need to figure out how are you going to use this stuff. So let's just take these in turn pretty quickly. I want to get to the other speakers. If we can hit the next slide. They're basically three critical things to do, and it's not when you're fighting contamination. It's not just about saying no. It's also about making sure people know what yes is. And so these critical things, these three critical things that are geared toward behavior change and really building knowledge with your residents, keep that in mind. Take that to heart. So. On the curbside side of things, curbside feedback. That's that personalized feedback. You see it represented with the oops tag, that red tag in the upper left with the cute little girl saying oops. But basically the idea of giving people very specific feedback about the contaminants you don't want and how they're doing. Second thing would be let them know what you do and don't want. An information card or a magnet is an easy way to get there. There are other ways, but that's just a very straightforward way. Send that to your residents once a year to keep them up to date. And then last up, issue specific. So let's say your very worst contaminant is bagged recyclables. It's just causing a problem at the MRF. It's a lot of weight, and it's gumming up their gears. We'll attack it head on. So go for a mailer, go for some signage as well, get something in people's hands. And there's similar approaches for drop-off, and we can talk more about that later. Let's hit the next slide, Keith. Yeah, so this is a really darn nice to have if you really want to engage your community and build that culture of, hey, my town is really a recycling town. This is what we do here. You want to work on this. You want to build awareness. You want to build culture. And so general advertising. So basically, recycle, shine on with the recycling symbol in the background, or maybe as far as here are the main materials that we want. And everybody has ways that they're already doing this, and every town's a little different as to what reaches people and what you can do reasonably and economically. I listed a bunch of stuff here, from billboards to print ads to videos and everything in between. But the idea is keep it top of mind. Keep it where people go to work, when they go to play, when they go to the restaurant, when they turn on the radio, when they turn on the television. They see a little something that reminds them, yeah, that's just part of who we are as folks in this town. And then last up, and this one's pretty darn important, is the last one thing. Where do people go in the modern age when they have a question? They go online. They're going to go to your website, and a lot of municipal websites are pretty rough. It's tough to maintain everything, and there's only so many resources, so of course they are. But if people can search for the main things that they might want to, answers to the main questions they might have, and they can see the main things you do and don't want, you're going to get way ahead of the game with the people who are most engaged in your program. So it's likely that only 10 to 15% of your residents are going to use your website in that way, but those are going to be the most engaged people who will tell other people about what's going on, and they're going to be the most engaged people who put the most material into their carts or bins. And so you really want to get them smart information the best way you can. So giving good customer service, giving them that standing resource.
Excellent. Thank you. So these elements were created to serve the what do we need to do and how do we need to do it. But let's dig in a little bit more and turn to our other speakers. And we'd like to start with kind of the baseline. So the goal of this next few seconds is really to to introduce you to the other speakers and have them talk about why did they engage with this in the first place. So give you a chance to find parts of their program that relate with yours. And so let's hear first from Gunther. Gunther, remind us where you're from again and talk to us a little bit about what got you started on trying to reduce contamination. What does your program really look like there?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to explain a little bit. In 2014, we began automated single-stream collection in 96-gallon carts, and of course, if the lid is closed and they're all lined up like soldiers on the curbside, you can't see that you have a problem. The driver doesn't see that he has a problem. It's not until it arrives at the MRF. So that's where our warning began. We received a polite but stern letter from Waste Management that owns the MRF that Lowell was contributing contamination through the single-stream recycling system, and I thought we didn't have any issues. Nobody called us. There was no communication with the hauler. So this has been a great project because it's created that triangle between the municipality, the hauler, and the MRF. And in their warning letter, they said if we don't clean up our material, then they will be implementing clauses in the contract for pass-through disposal costs and penalties and retrucking. So it's not just a financial thing for us to make sure we take care of, but also for the commodities, the cardboard and the bottles, the cans, glass, tin, and aluminum, to make sure that they get a clean stream. So we have doubled our volume, and back to the more is better. Well, sometimes more was more contamination. So we're very glad that the partnership with Mass DEP and TRP allowed us to the opportunity to reach out to residents, and later we'll be talking about a waste characterization study, exactly what we found.
Great. How about from you, Patrick, from the hauler perspective? Tell us a little bit of your interest here.
When West Springfield went to fully automated single stream with 96-gallon carts as well, we as a hauler also noticed, when the driver's dumping it, we use, it's called a Corrado can. So the driver's dumping it in front of him, so when it comes out of the container, he reported that there was some contamination. We work closely with our town of West Springfield in this case, and they also had some issues with Springfield MRF. And so when they found out about this program, we continue to partner with them and work on this program to do our part to help the city reduce their contamination in their 96-gallon carts.
Great. And Jason, in lieu of Greg, anything to add from the drop-off perspective?
Yeah, so Greg represents the town of Needham. They've got a whiz-bang drop-off center that's a recycling and transfer station for a town of like 10,000 folks, and it's pretty widely used. And when Greg started in his role like a year and a half ago, he looked at the quality of his materials and thought, boy, I think this could be a lot better. I'd like to be sending more high-quality material to my MRF. And so he talked to his MRF, and the MRF actually said, boy, your stuff's actually pretty darn clean. But Greg felt like he could have it a lot cleaner, so he took it as a personal mission to do so. And so even though his stuff isn't particularly problematic to begin with, he wants to make sure it's as marketable as possible, and he wants to make sure that he's doing his part to deliver something that really can be used and keep his residue rates down. And so he had this fairly long plan, and it was long because he lacked some budget and resources, like basically a 3 to 5 year plan to start trying to do a few things. And when Mass DEP and Recycling Partnership, when we all got together with him, he saw that he could do twice as much as he wanted, 6 times as fast, and I think it got him pretty excited. He definitely said that it has. So that was their baseline. They had some pretty clean stuff, but they had good aspirations for really the program.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so those are the drivers behind what got us here, and that's the kind of framework of the community. So if we knew these communities had a problem and they wanted to begin to assess it, Patrick, talk a little bit about anything that happened, any actions that were taking place before the pilot. So any pre-pilot things that you tried to do to reduce contamination.
Yeah, before the pilot program started, West Springfield was in the midst of trying to do some enforcement. You know, we would point out areas of town that were the worst contaminants, and they would send out their team to, you know, walk the routes and check through the containers and tag the ones, because we have sorry tags that we provide for the city, and they would tag the containers, you know, with clear instructions as to what the problem and concern was. And then, you know, as my drivers would go through, they would know not to collect those until it was corrected. And that town was keeping a list so they could start to identify the repeat offenders. You know, so they could send them directly with some information on what they needed to do in order to clean up their recycling. So there was some enforcement already going on before the pilot program.
That's true. And Gunther, you had some work going on too. Well, not so much because you didn't know it was as big of a problem, right? So what were you doing?
One of the things that was a clear observation is prior to automated collection, we were dual stream in 18-gallon curbside tubs. I think a lot of municipalities started that way. And the assumption was that since it was manually separated by the residents, set out in 2 containers, that it was a pretty clean stream. And it wasn't until that we received warnings from the MRF that we decided action was necessary. And the Department of Environmental Protection in Massachusetts has an annual grant application where municipalities can apply for in-kind and technical assistance and funding to deal with curbside issues. And we were lucky and thankful to receive some allocation. So we had this in line before the TRP partnership came together, and we're grateful to be a pilot area in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Okay, Gunther, by the way, I'm hearing from a few people that you're hard to hear. You sound far away, so we don't want to miss your words. And what about Greg? Well, Jason, on behalf of Greg, tell us about what was going on at the drop-off site.
Yeah, so like I mentioned a second ago, Greg had some plans for cleaning up the stream before we came into his life. He hadn't had a chance to implement them yet. His biggest one was signage. He came to his site, and like a lot of drop-off sites, they put up initial signage, and then whenever they had an issue, they would put up a new sign. You know, a new material, new sign, a new rule, a new sign. And it had gotten to be kind of a sign, alphabet soup of signage, and he wanted to have cleaner, clearer signage. So he worked with a local sign maker and had designed signage for across his entire fairly large site. He's got 3 big recycling walls, as well as taking a host of just about any other material you could think of at a drop-off center and transfer station. So that's what he had done. He hadn't gotten to the point where he could even fund those signs, but he had started working on the problem of how can I communicate clearly what I want as the beginning step of it all. And when we came in, honestly, it made our work so much easier because he already had all the specs for the signs. Here's where they could go. Here's what they might say. And so we worked with him on the designs a bit. But boy, it made it a lot easier. So in short, he had done not a lot that actually had reached people, but he had done quite a bit of background work.
Right. So anything to add, Janice, just kind of from the state perspective of actions before the pilot, because the state had been working on this, right? Anything to add there?
No, I think it was just, I wasn't working on this project when it first began, but from what I heard, it was there was a lot of effort to find communities that had the resources to take advantage of the pilot. So I thought that was important to note, because it wasn't like everyone could just jump in. It really took a big commitment on the part of Needham and West Springfield and Lowell to take this project on. So we thank them for being our guinea pig.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. So those were the actions before the pilot, but when we knew we needed to begin to dig into truly testing both the operations and the communications that would be necessary to keep participation high, reduce contamination, we began to drill down into routes and sites. So if we can't do everything at once, how do we begin? Jason, talk to us a little bit about, from the drop-off perspective, of how Greg determined where best to begin.
Yeah, so he has 3 recycling walls, if you will, and he's a dual stream. He's got a dual stream setup, and he had basically two sets of each type of roll-off container along each of the 3 walls, and those are probably the focal points of his site. He takes quite a bit of universal waste. He's got a pretty big organics area. He's got a large building for a transfer station. But in terms of what's front and center and obvious, you know, the recycling walls are where it's at. And one in particular, it's called Kenny's Wall, because a gentleman named Kenny's been working on that wall for 29 years, kind of hauling it, keeping it clean. But that's the one where most people go to, and it also was the one that, in Greg's estimation, had the poorest quality. So he said, gosh, let's focus on all 3. Let's really focus on Kenny's Wall, because there's more opportunity there. There's more volume and there's more opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Patrick, you took a little bit of a different approach, right?
Yeah, well, in this map is actually of West Springfield. It's one of the more concentrated areas with a large immigration population. There's a lot of Russian culture down there, so there's kind of a language barrier. And a lot of times what we've noticed in recycling is anything that has a recycling symbol on it, people throw in the recycling. The problem is that the MRFs don't always accept everything that technically can be recycled, and that's where, you know, the education piece is key. You know, we've always had our customer service department, when we do have to tag and leave stuff, you know, we make sure that we're explaining that, yes, it technically could be recycled, but unfortunately the local MRF can't take it because it's a commodity that they can't do anything with, so it ends up having to be thrown in the trash anyway. So that was a big part of the contamination. And this was the area where, you know, they go out and they do their enforcement and really work on a way to communicate effectively, you know, with the culture that may not always fully be able to understand English or read English, you know, and work to get materials out that they can understand.
That's great. And how about you, Gunther?
So Lowell is a large urban area. We are the 4th largest city in the Commonwealth. We service 5,000 households every day of the week. And it didn't make sense to go to one of the most suburban, the most affluent areas and sample their recycling. So we chose the middle of the line, and with the assistance of the Recycling Partnership, we settled on the Friday route of 500 households. And each one of those on Friday received individual attention and opened lids on every collection day.
Yep. So those opening of lids, I did have a question from someone. How do you do that if the route's early? Is it a pre-dawn exercise? I said, yeah, we were out there with you, weren't we, Gunther?
Rain, snow, right, just like the post office, we were out there. And our hauler begins at 7 a.m., so we do by ordinance require that all of the carts are out for collection by 7 a.m. As early as 7 p.m. the evening before. And when we get there, yes, for enforcement and education components, our day begins at 6. We want to get ahead of the trucks. And in particular, in these pilot areas, we coordinated with the hauler so that they would keep their trucks out of the Friday blue zone, and we would have about an hour and a half to individually, sometimes we had 2 inspectors, 3 inspectors open each one, and just surface proof. We weren't going elbow deep down into the recyclables. This is just a visual check, maybe with a ruler, move some stuff aside. But yeah, it was the first couple of hours of the day.
Yeah. Very true. So once we understand where we wanted to target some work, we still had some work to do to understand what we were targeting. You know, I think everyone can rattle off a list of the things they think might be their least favorite contaminant to see in their community bins when they come through. But in all of our work, we always ask our communities to start first with a conversation with the MRF. If the MRF is experiencing high contamination rates, then we certainly want to target our activities for the things that are giving them the most trouble. So what you see on the screen right here is a form that we have up on our website for free that you can use to steer your conversation with the MRF to really find out exactly what they're taking, because sometimes that's a discussion to be had, and also what's hurting them the most. What's the thing that's giving them the biggest anxiety? And so in doing this work, we then drilled down into the 6 things that were causing the most trouble for the MRF and set our priorities around those. And in this case, it was trying to drive the recovery of the things on the top and preventing the things on the bottom. So those included encouraging consumers or their citizens to not put their materials in a plastic bag. So the MRF would consider any sealed plastic bag trash, whether it was recyclables or not. They're not going to break them. So let's first get people to put things loose in the cart, not in a bag. And then in second, film is always, those plastic bags are called film, are always a problem for the MRF. So how do we encourage people to instead return those bags to retail? The third thing really being yuck, and that's the food, the residue, the grassy things that are part, and reducing that yuck factor. And we went through many different ways of what to call this. And the fourth thing that the MRF was really experiencing were linens. These are very tangleable items, the cloth and clothing, and people confusing their recycling cart with a clothing donation, so encouraging them to take that separately. And finally, really digging into the tangler, so hoses, extension cords, things that shut down the operations of the MRF and keeping that running. And what's interesting about this is that sometimes, you might have a different item that bothers you most when you see it, bowling balls, for example. But by starting first with a conversation with the MRF to really steer more of what can be marketed and less of what can't, it's the best way to have impact on the bottom line of how to drive the recovery of the best materials possible. So with that in mind, we really felt prepared to begin a good approach for driving recovery and reducing contamination. Jason, talk to us a little bit about the timing that's involved here. And if you can, Jason, also touch on the concern about privacy. I had several questions about the privacy part of this as well.
Sure, I'll do my best on that. So first off, the timing on this thing, I think it's important when we're painting this picture to picture or to describe exactly sort of month by month what was happening. We talked early on that communications plus operations is the trick, and the communications are the marketing campaign pieces and the mailers and the signage and whatnot, and the operations pieces. The MRF survey was an operations piece for sure, but then also the feet on the street, the boots on the ground, tipping lids or working at the drop-off site, figuring out how to coordinate with the hauler, all that kind of thing is operations. So basically, back in March, we did a lot of planning. We talked to MRFs, we sat down with all the communities, and collectively we came up with basically our plan of attack. And on the communication side, we did everything you'd need to do to get ready for some sort of communications campaign. So we customized designs. We made sure that our material lists were tight. We made sure we understood how we were distributing things. Was it the purchase of materials to be mailed, or just what? And we went ahead and ordered all that stuff and placed all the orders that we needed, so we'd have kind of our war chest ready. And at the same time, on the operations side of things, we worked with hiring or finding volunteers for the feet on the street, for the actual people that are going to be doing things. We worked with the hauler, and Patrick can talk more about that later. And we set up curbside protocols that we'll talk about in a minute in terms of, well, you send somebody out on the street to tip lids, let's say, and look in carts and leave notes. What does that look like? And you know, how do they do that exactly? I mean, what do they carry with them, and what do they do if it rains? And you know, where do they leave the tag so the driver can see it? So we worked out all of that stuff and did a bit of training, and then we dove in April. And on the communication side, we did a phased rollout of communication, so it wasn't just blam, one shot and done. We started with a lot of general messaging around here's what we want and here's what we don't want. And then we got specific a few weeks in and said, boy, the top contaminant is, well, in this case it was stuff in plastic bags. So we did a pretty good mini campaign around that with a mailer and then something else, like a bit of signage or whatever, to make sure we reinforce the message. Same time, we had feet on the street. And at the drop-off center, that was not curbside, obviously, but it was still, you know, feet in front of the roll-off containers. And then after a few months of that, come July, we got to the assessment phase. And I'll talk about data later, but basically, you know, what gets measured gets managed, and that's, we wanted to know how it all went, and we have some results. So that's the short of it. And in terms of privacy, I mean, once the stuff hits the street and the cart, it belongs to the city, so there really weren't any privacy issues that we experienced. We didn't touch carts in people's backyards or anything. So so that actually was not an issue.
Yeah, and there are some communities that think about that differently, but the majority of the communities consider it their material. The same thing applies to you know, preventing scavenging. But that's not to say people didn't stick their heads out of windows and say, you know, what are you doing in my trash can? And that was excellent. And all of those conversations, which started in kind of a startled way, ended in such a positive way to say, oh, we're checking recycling and we are trying to make it better, and we see that you're a dedicated recycler. And but that was also the opportunity to say, but by the way, did you know that these plastic bags are best back to retail and never in a bin? And so so, you know, there are sensitivities there, and as Gunther, I think it was Gunther earlier, said, we were doing a surface view. We weren't digging through carts, we were lifting the lids and looking at the top, because you can get pretty good perspective of what's there right at the very beginning. But as Jason said earlier, you know, we've got a 3-1-1 approach here. We're trying to prioritize our approach to make it easier for these partner cities to prioritize how to make change. And so that 3-1-1 approach of what to do first, then later, can be applied differently for each of the speakers on the line today. So Gunther, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how the 3-1-1 was applied to Lowell?
So the primary thing that we did, and Jason mentioned as part of assembling our war chest and having tools in the holster, getting ready, was a mailer. It is very similar to what was just shown, the 5 categories of acceptable material and the 5 categories of unacceptable material. And through our local printer and mail house, we addressed 1 to each household, 2 if it was a duplex, or 3 if it was a 3-family, and that way they physically got it in their hand. The part of the 3-1-1 with TRP and their visual designers, we created 2x3 A-frames, and we have 6 of those in our Friday Blue pilot area. So not only did they see it in the house, hopefully they used the magnet and put it on the refrigerator, but now they also see it on the street corner when they're walking to the bus stop or walking to the local school. And then the 3rd stage, again with TRP as a partner and Mass DEP with resources, we had our local supermarket give us window space. So the literature that you see in particular about bring bags back to retail was in a grocery store, and that way they see it at home, they see it on the street, and they see it where they shop.
That's great. There were a couple, looking at questions coming in to make sure we're getting them. For the curbside assessment, some questions about what categories were used to, I think, to determine the problems. If we look at those problem items that I listed earlier, those were the formation, those really guided the OOPS tag, the things that were rejected. Right, Gunther, anything to say more about that?
The important thing, and I know there's a slide shortly that will address it, is since sometimes we had visitors, TRP came on site, Mass DEP Janice came on site, we had 2 inspectors. are we all looking at the same thing? You know, is contamination, is a pizza box enough to reject the whole cart? So part of considering it contamination was that we're all reading from the same sheet of music.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question about the applying the 311 approach to in communities with lower incomes as well. And we'll definitely show you some route data that's come from this. But we did try to choose a variable set of demographics so that we could answer that question positively. So Jason Patrick, one bit more here with the 311 approach in West Springfield, and if you need to punt anything to Jason, feel free.
Well, exactly. Some of the things that West Springfield did, of course, I wouldn't be privy to. I know they did some mailings and such, and I think Jason can speak more to that. But from the holler perspective, you know, what we do is there was 3 tags that they were using. It was a great job tag when they went out, so that the people who were doing really well with the recycling got recognition. And then there was the sorry tag that they would put on carts that they were rejecting from the lid lift. And then the oops tags, our driver, you know, when he sees contamination coming out from underneath the good stuff, he would put an oops tag on it, and we would provide that address to, you know, to the city. And then the next week, that recycling, they would go in and you know, kind of stick it a little bit more than just a surface look to see if it was, you know, if they were just trying to hide stuff in the bottom. So we thought it was a really good approach to, you know, try and make sure that people weren't hiding it and really target repeat offenders. Jason?
Yeah. Jason, anything to add, or you want to click on to Needham?
I think we can go on to Needham. The approach in West Springfield was pretty darn similar. So I will take 20 seconds for one piece. They did a robocall in West Springfield. They had the ability to target by neighborhood with phone calls, which we were kind of blown away. We said, that's a municipal thing. They said, yeah, we can do that. And so to save some money and take advantage of a resources they had that their residents were used to and apparently liked, rather than printing something and displaying it somewhere or mailing it or whatever, that was a way that they reached quite a few of their residents, was with a robocall. And basically, somebody with a nice voice in town just recorded it. Everybody got a phone call, and we wrote a 20-second script and informed folks of the good and the bad, and rock and roll. It was a really nice example of how you can use your local resources. Looking at Needham, so Needham's going to be different than the other two because, again, it's a drop-off program, which is really nice. Everybody's coming to you, so you have one place where you can educate everybody. So again, I talked about the signage. We did do an information card mailer, and that was really nice. It was basically like an advertisement because even though a lot of the community already used the drop-off site, a lot of the community didn't, and some of them were, some of them were pretty pleasantly surprised. They said, "Oh, wow, that's a resource I can use. That's wonderful." So it ended up serving as an information piece for sure, but an advertisement as well. We had hoped to find some volunteers to stand out on their busiest days, which were Tuesdays and Saturdays, and just let people know our main message, which was please don't put bagged recyclables in any of the recycling roll-off containers. We weren't able to pull that off, and so we hired some delightful temps and armed them with some handouts that were really more conversation starters than anything else. And we deployed A-frames. So just a basic little A-frame sign, 2 foot by 3 foot with coroplast on it, pretty inexpensive, that just reminded people bagged recyclables, no good in the recycling containers, please. And those things because they were different, they had regular users of the site, they really drew people's attention and really drove the message home. We didn't really end up getting into the general outreach so much. We had some banners planned, we have some social media planned. The short of it is we had a captive audience coming to us, so we weren't as pressed on time on that. We did provide some graphics for their website to reinforce all this messaging, though. And in the end, I mean, I've been out at the site, Janice was out at the site, talking to people, and there's been a lot of positive feedback.
Great. So Gunther, you preluded this by saying that the first step is really making sure that everyone's speaking the same message when it comes to how you evaluate contamination in the bin. Here's a picture of your crew and some of our team there at the early morning getting ready to go. Talk a little bit about what you did with your staff to create consistency across the program.
So the nice thing that we see in that group picture is that we have representatives from our holler, we have representatives from the city, from TRP, from the state, and everybody kind of has their own perspective going into it. And you can see our trusty leader there with a stack of the OOPS cards, and we were comparing what we saw in the bin with what was in the picture or the icons. And I know that Patrick mentioned it before. One of the things that we try to tell folks is we don't follow the numbered triangles anymore, because then we would get milk crates and 5-gallon buckets and film that from dry cleaners or supermarkets. So having everybody together once, looking at what our definition is was a great starting point.
Awesome. Anything to add there, Patrick?
No, that's kind of right on exactly what we did with the West Springfield team, was make sure that everybody is on the same page, because that is the key to education, is teaching everyone in the cities the same thing.
Very true. Well, so from there were related to this, there were standard operating procedures, right? So Jason, why don't you drill in a little bit to these speakers, or to these procedures that were used?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but in short, you can't just send a crew out and say, hey, here's a stack of OOPS tags and good luck. And Gunther, I think, said it really quite well. You need to have consistency in your program so that the residents get a streamlined and straightforward message. And so we really looked at what does somebody need on these routes to be effective? You know, how long will it take them to do things, and how can they do that? How can they record things well? How can they get out and go and be effective? So we looked at some simple steps. First, before you go out on the route, stock up. Make sure you've got enough of everything. A few information cards in case a resident's outside. You got enough OOPS tags. If you're doing thank you tags, which we think is a good idea for positive reinforcement of good behavior, grab a nice stack of those. Grab a nice marker that's going to be visible on the tag. And however you're recording things, however you're recording what you're doing, and we use clipboards with record sheets. An app is something that a lot of people use as well. Make sure you have that device with you and ready to go. So you stock up, you go out, you tip every lid, you don't dig. And one of the findings of this work was that by and large people aren't hiding stuff halfway down or all the way down to their container. By and large, it's a pretty consistent mix throughout. And so just tip the lid, don't dig around, just look for the main materials that are on that OOPS tag, the main things that have been identified by your MRF to tackle, and tag for just those items. And then if you leave a tag, tie it somewhere where the driver can see it. We had our folks turn the cart 90 degrees so that it was really obvious to the driver, hey, don't pick this one up, it's got a problem. And then they would just record it on their sheet. They say, at this address, I just left a tag. And they would click a clicker to count the set out, and then they walk on. And I know that was a lot of words, but basically it just took a few seconds at each stop, and folks got pretty darned efficient. For a fairly spread out route, tipping 100 lids an hour was extremely manageable, and then if you get into a denser population, you could get up to 125, 140, something like that in an hour. So you can do the math pretty quickly on how much ground you can cover on a route, just one person.
Excellent. Anything to add to that, Gunther?
I think in the bottom right-hand corner there's a package of incentives that was brought along. So that
very true. Yeah, donuts help.
Sometimes if you want volunteers to wake up early in the morning, then it helps to bring coffee and donuts.
Good call. And Janice, you have something to add there too?
Yeah, just something that we learned on the last day in Lowell was, just trying to pick up the bin a little bit to see how heavy it was could often be an indicator that there was something in there that maybe you couldn't see from the top, but like that shouldn't be in there. 'Cause why would it be that, 50 pounds?
Good call. So this was the work that was done. So by letting people know ahead of time what was coming, by using reinforcing street signs and in-store signs in some places, robocalls in one places, and mailers, reminders, and then the primary piece being the OOPS tag. The question was really, can we drive good recovery of material without alienating the public? And what we found is that we can. And so I'm going to ask Jason to dig in a little bit to the data we have to date about the recovery of the increased recovery of material and the decrease of collection. I will add that we have some other data that we had hoped to be able to share, but it's just not ready yet. But we ran recovery rates before and after the pilots to see how much trash was in the recycling, how much recycling was in the trash, and then those happened at the end of it too, and that data is just not quite in. But we wanted to be able to measure that change. But because we don't have that, but we do have participation set out rate information. So Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what we find there?
Yeah, Keith, and this is really where the rubber hits the road. I mean, you know, we did all this effort and intervention and work with these great partners, but the big question is, how did it go? Okay, this slide is too busy and it freaks me out. Let's go to the next one.
Fair enough.
That feels better. Okay, so in short, we're going to look at a couple of specific things. Keith mentioned that the data we've crunched already mainly is around the set-out rates on the curbside routes and the rejections, the number of OOPS tags that were left, and also the fix rates, when those rejected carts were fixed. And were they fixed the next week, 2 weeks later, never? Those are the pieces of data that we actually have, and it's hot off the presses. The analysis was finished by our tech guy, Cody Marshall, just yesterday. I'm not sure he slept the night before to get it done. And we're all pretty jazzed. I don't know if I slept last night because I was pretty jazzed about the results. But let's take them one at a time. So Gunther mentioned that we worked on 2 routes in his community. These routes were each just under 500 homes. So he basically split routes in half so we could really double down. One route was an average quality route. You might give it a C on a scale of A to F. It was all right. And you can see kind of the top left, it says rejection rate at 29.9%. So the first week we were out on the route, about 30% of the carts received an OOPS tag. They got rejected. They weren't collected. And then you follow weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera. Somewhere between weeks 4 and 6, and actually I say weeks, but it's actually biweekly collection, so really collection cycle 4, 5, and 6. The rejection rate stabilized kind of low, less than 5 really, just a few percentage points. And that's one of the questions we wanted to answer. How long does it take to really see a fairly sustained new normal? Another question we really wanted to answer is the line beneath it, the set-out rate. And you can see the set-out rate roughly remained the same. There was some concern over, hey, if we're going out there and aggressively chasing after some contaminants, are people going to get disenfranchised, or are we handling it well enough that they won't? And this shows that they didn't. They participated quite well, and their set-outs proved it. Let's move to the next slide, Keith. We're going to follow the trend. We're going to follow it. Lowell had a poor quality route on A to F. You might call it an F. And the rejection rate started pretty darn high, over 50% that first week. And you can see, just like the last route, it dropped and dropped and dropped. And we believe if we stayed out for a couple more weeks, we could have had it drop a little bit more, but the new normal seems to have hovered around 10%, and that's a heck of a lot better than 50 in just a few short intervention cycles. And the set-out rate, once again, held steady. So feeling good. Let's go to the next.
Hey, Jason, how long between interventions here?
It's biweekly collection, so every 2 weeks there was an intervention. So every single time a cart was there was a collection day, we did an intervention, but it wasn't weekly because they have every other week collection.
That's great.
Good question. Yeah, West Springfield, I mean, it's just more of the same, guys. Now, this one looks a little weird because that first week looks like not a big rejection rate. We were actually just getting our feet under us. This was the first route we did in any of this. And so we are sort of training on route. All of us were training on route. And it was a super nasty, rainy, cold day, so we might have wanted to get in from the weather. But after, I'd say, looking from intervention 2 on the rejection rate, you can see it started off at, hey, not bad, a 7.3. That's really not bad. But in the last couple of weeks, it ended up beneath 2%, and we feel like that's where it's going to stay with some nice consistency. And the set-out rate, once again, remained in the same ballpark throughout. And last up is the poor quality route, the F quality route, if you will, in West Springfield. Hey, Keith.
Jason, before you go there, I'm getting a couple questions. Can you define once more what set-out rate is, rejection rate, and what intervention means?
I love all of those questions. So the set-out rate is simply the number of carts that are out on the route relative to the total number of households on the route. So if a set-out rate is 50%, if you had a 1,000 household route and 500 people set up their carts, you'd have a set-out rate of 50%. So just on one collection day, how many carts are out there? And the rejection rate is of the carts that are out on the street on any particular day, how many of those received oops tags, how many of them got rejected. And so that's that metric. And then an intervention, it's basically just a collection cycle. So any collection day was an intervention. We could have just called it collection day number 1 and collection day number 2. If it had been weekly, we just had week 1 and week 2. We weren't sure exactly what to call it since it was bi-weekly. We didn't want to confuse folks, and I think maybe we did. But that's what an intervention meant. Good question. Yeah. So more of the same. West Springfield, it dropped. It got more consistent, similar to the poor quality route at Lowell. It ended up hovering somewhere around 10%, and the set-out rates seemingly weren't affected by our efforts. Let's look at it a different way, Keith, if you would go to the next slide. And so this one, the orange bars are, it's the same exact stuff, just presented for the more visual, kind of more visual learners in our group. But the orange bars are set-out rates. The blue bars are rejection rates. What I really want to focus on is that red line. Big fan of the red line, and that's basically the trend line of rejection. And so you can see in the top left, it drops, and then it stays dropped. And you can see it in the bottom right. It drops, and then it gets pretty low, and it kind of seems to stabilize at the end. And these are the 2 Lowell routes that we just talked about. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the same darn thing with the West Springfield routes. It's a little bit less pronounced than the first one, or the one that only had 7.3% rejection right at the off. So there was less decline to happen, but there was still statistically a pretty large decline. And then you can see it very clearly in the bottom right. So again, what this tells us is if you were to define success as number of tags being left, number of sort of bad actors out there, and being able to get to a new normal with much fewer numbers, I think you'd be pretty happy with these results. What's really exciting is the next slide. And it's the last data slide that we've got, but it's just jam-packed with insights. And here it is. It's pretty cool. Let's start at the top left so I can explain what you're looking at. And the trends are going to follow through all four of these graphs. But on the Lowell average quality route, which was the very first one we've talked about throughout this thing, you can see the big blue section that says 64%. 64% of the carts on the route, the households on the route, and there's 439 households, were never rejected. So 64% of households on the route never received a rejection at all. Go a little over to the left, that orange piece that says 24, 24% received one oops tag, one rejection notice, and then they cleaned up their act. The next collection cycle, they pulled out their contaminants, their cart was collected, and it stayed clean throughout the rest of the cycle. So what's really exciting about that, and you'll see the exact same thing in the chart beside it to the right, is that on that route, basically 90% of the carts, 88% of the carts, either needed 0 or 1 intervention, and then they were golden, they were clean. That's super light touch. Going further around the circle, the gray is a little inconclusive. It means they got a tag, and then the next week they didn't set out. Now, they might have set it out 2 weeks later. They might have just been taking time to clean it up. They might not have ever set it out. They might have gone to on a vacation to the Bahamas. We really couldn't say. Unfortunately, we don't have that data. So that's a little inconclusive, that little gray area. The 7% is interesting because they received more than 1 tag. They could have received 2, 3, 4 tags, but eventually they cleaned up their act. And so those were folks that were probably like, really, you're not going to pick this up? And they put it out again, and then we're like, really, we're not going to pick it up, but then they cleaned up their stuff. And what I think is maybe most interesting out of all of this is that last little piece. Would you call that margarita color or lime? The one with 1% on it at the 12 o'clock portion, that 1% represents folks that received a bunch of tags, they got rejected a lot, they never cleaned up their acts. And what I take away from this, what we take away from this is when you're trying to tackle contamination and you say, oh boy, I've got to work across my entire city to tackle contamination because my MRF's sending me nasty grams, boy, that's daunting. And then all of a sudden you say, you know, what if I just went to the worst quality routes based on what my drivers are telling me, my MRF is telling me? Oh, well, that's still a lot of households. What do I do? But then after just a few interventions, you can boil it down to just one or a few percentage points of all the households on the route. So in this case, 4 households on the route that are just consistently causing problems. Boy, you can target, and that's really powerful. And you'll see the same thing in the West Springfield data. If you go down to the 2 bottom charts, the poor quality routes, it's a similar trend, except for about 75% of the carts are clean, perfect, wonderful after a 0 or 1 intervention. And in the end, it's more like 5 to 7% of the carts never got cleaned up. But still, it's a greatly reduced number. And so I think that's a critically important thing to think about. And again, that those poor quality routes had quite a few more multifamily. I believe that was referenced earlier in the talk. Quite a few more multifamily, which, you know, our belief is, our hypothesis is that it was harder for the message of, hey, you resident number 3, you are doing this and you need to clean this up. That's our belief, that it was just tougher to get that targeted message to the right person. And so that's our running hypothesis at this point. So I guess the last point to make on all this stuff, if your goal is to be able to really whittle down and target much, much better, this approach is definitely working. We can feel really good in saying that. Now, the pieces that Keith alluded to earlier, the data that we are still crunching and vetting and working on around the weight, the recovery rate stuff, if your goal has to do with reducing the weight of contamination or possibly reducing a particular problematic item or material based on what the MRF is seeing, we just don't have that data yet. We will. So I think when you're going into these things, think about what success looks like. And we're hoping for a success across the board, but right now with the data that we have in hand, we can definitely say this approach will allow you to target like crazy.
So Jason, I think we need one clarifying thing before that we go away from this slide of what does a tag mean, because we've got 2 different examples in Lowell and West Springfield, right? And we had 3 different tags in some of these. A good job tag, oops, you didn't quite get it, which sometimes meant we'll collect it this time, but next time we won't. And then a flat out rejection where you said they turned it to the side, it was not picked up, and it was the resident's job to handle it. So could you clarify one more time those 3, the steps of using the tags to communicate with the public, and any other clarification of how those steps should be applied to what it means when we use the term tag here?
Yeah, no, that's really important, and I can see where that'd be kind of confusing with so many different tags that we might use. In this case, the tags mean a rejection notice, a rejection tag, where somebody goes through and says, we're not going to pick up your cart until you clean it up, and you're being rejected for one of these 6 targeted items, and we're not touching it until you clean it up. And that's, when I say tagging, I mean full-on rejection. Those other tags, a thank you tag, we use thank you tags a couple different ways. If somebody cleans up their cart and your data tracking is solid, you can then say, wow, they cleaned up their cart, and next time you walk through, you leave them a thank you tag. Thanks for cleaning up your cart. You're pretty great. Or if you don't have that level of sophistication in your data tracking, when you're walking the route and you just see a particularly clean load of material, you can leave them a thank you tag and say, boy, your stuff looks really great. You're super. And then there's that other tag that we call it a reminder tag. It's the ones that haulers would use, particularly haulers in fully automated trucks, because they're not going to be able to they're going to service the cart. So the cart's going to be empty. So when the resident comes home, we can't really put a sign on it or a tag on it that says we're not going to collect your cart, because we already have. So basically we just leave them a little reminder. Hey, we saw some dodgy stuff in your cart. Please don't do it again, or we won't be able to collect it next time. The nice thing, and really interesting thing about that, and I didn't include the data on here just to keep it streamlined, there were precious few of those left on the routes. And what that answered for us was, are people hiding stuff deep in their carts? If they were, that's where those reminder tags would come in, because the hauler would actually see that material as they dumped and looked at the cameras in their trucks. They didn't leave many of those tags, which tells us, no, there's not a lot of big dodgy material in the middle and bottom of the carts. So anyway, those are the 3 tags, and in this case, I was just talking about those oops tags, those big red problem tags.
Mm-hmm. And this approach is kind of a pool shock approach. So what we're doing is targeting the regions with potentially the worst routes to really stop the behavior, change behavior, and clean it up, and then maintain throughout the year with ongoing education. Janice, tell us a little bit more, now that the first pilots are over and Massachusetts will be shifting towards the next phase. Tell us a little more about your impressions. Janice?
Hi, sorry. There were some people talking right next to my cube, and I didn't want them to be picked up.
Thank you.
So my impressions of the approach so far, it seems like we had really good results. All of the interventions so far seem to have been well received by the communities that implemented them, and there were no, from what I recall, there were no calls from disgruntled residents, so that's good. We, from MassDEP's point of view, are gung-ho to get this started and finish up the toolkit and get it rolling for other communities that want to participate. So we are very excited about it.
Excellent. Greg, I'm sorry, Gunther, how about you? Why don't you dig in a little bit more?
One of the things that you have this slide up with our partners in the field. Lowell uses a 96-gallon blue lid in our blue route. For single stream, next to that you see a burgundy cranberry colored cart with a purple bag. That is a completely separate stream. Waste Management collects the automated cart and the overflow bags, just so if there was any confusion about that picture. In the end, the important thing is consistency, not just consistency in weekly visits to the households and inspections, but consistencies in presentations to, it might be the DPW commissioner that needs to be tuned into what's going on. If there are phone calls, as Janice mentioned, the phone did not ring off the hook. I brought it upstream even further and went to the city council and the city manager. It's always good for them to know what's going on, especially if there should be phone calls.
Excellent. And Patrick, anything else from the holler perspective here to be, to share with the group?
I just think as the hauler, in order to, make programs like this successful, we have to be engaged with our communities. And, we have to work closely with the DPWs and the people in charge of the programs, to make sure that we're doing our part and that we continue to do our part. It's not just, pilot program and done. We have to go out there every single week and make sure that we're still following the same process for them so that, we can maintain the program.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got a few more minutes here, and we're going to try and get to a few more of the questions. But as far as the next steps, Janice, talk to us about what's coming next.
Next step for us is finalizing, getting that information from the recovery rate study and using that to sort of influence the toolkit that CRP is preparing. We're going to be training the facilitators, like I mentioned earlier. We're going to be having a third webinar in late October that will sort of go through the results, and this will be the third in a series of webinars that sort of talked about the process all along. And then I want to say that we're going to start rolling it out in November. That's the hope, so that communities that are interested can start implementing early 2017. If weather permits, they'll be able to get started in the winter.
Great. Well, good. So those are the next steps in Massachusetts, and we love this statewide partnership to be able to support this good work. And it's everybody who's been on the phone in the state has been excellent. We've been learning together, testing, revising. And so now the question I'm getting from a lot of you of, well, what does this mean for the rest of us? So as a national nonprofit, we exist just to help make the system better. And this toolkit that we're launching today is funded in part by all of our funding partners, so companies who want to see our mission of improving curbside recycling and drop-off recycling met. And so shout out to them for supporting us. And so as soon as this website's over, shortly after, you'll get a link, or you can go to recyclingpartnership.org and click on tools. And there you'll find 3 different toolkits, one on reducing contamination, one on cart-based recycling, so if you're in bins and thinking about transitioning to carts, and a third on increasing participation. That's actually very similar to the reducing contamination, because the first step of reducing contamination is getting public buy-in and increasing what they're doing well. But these are all available for download and adoption by you, whether you're a community, a county, a state, a hauler, a MRF. We're happy to share, the list goes on, a tribe, a base, etc., school. And these tools are available for you. And what we've done is distill the process that we've talked about today into a series of steps. So first, do this, communicating with the MRF. Here's that checklist that we showed. Next, let's make a plan. And so for each step of the way, there is a guideline of what to do first and next, and then the tools associated with them, and also some case studies so you can see other communities that are doing it in action. So we encourage you to go to the site and sign up if you'd like any of these. It's a growing site, so this is the beginning, and we're going to continue to add things like driver videos, so a short video that you can use to train your drivers and operators so everyone's on the same page. Our resource library will always grow, and we are doing it just to help you meet you where you are. So we've got 2 kinds of design files there. Simple ones for folks who don't have a designer but can pull off a JPEG and put it into play, and then more complex design files for those who might be able to go to a printer or to work with an outside designer to help meet those needs. So we're trying to give you a couple of variations there, and hopefully they'll be resourceful. Here's what it looks like, those steps along the way with case studies, and then also the downloads, so you're welcome to them. And if you haven't signed up for it yet, we'd also encourage you to please go to our website and take a look there and sign up for our newsletter. That's how we distill little pieces and send them to you from time to time to be able to help. I have a bunch of questions coming on about how much this costs and was it multifamily and different things like that. So Jason, for the most part, these were single-family households or under 4 units under 4. Is that right?
Yeah, it was probably units under 6 would be closer to the point, but also drop off, of course. So yeah, curbside to up to units of 6 and drop off.
Right, and then the drop off programs as well for those sort of programs. So it's there for both. Now for the purpose of this work, this was funded in part with DEP, but it also took effort from the community. So Gunther, can you talk a little bit about how, in your example, this project was funded and what it looks like for the return for that effort?
Absolutely. We were lucky enough to apply early to Mass DEP, and they have funds that we earn through a dividends program. It's a checklist and an application that you're vetted by the number of points. And between a specific grant for contamination and some of our award grants, we were able to have a part-time technician who works 20 hours a week, and that really facilitated the boots on the ground, opening the lids, and support here through the Department of Public Works to make sure that they have a DPW vehicle. We don't want to put anybody at risk and make them be in their personal vehicles and in plain clothes, so a city jacket, a city ID is an important component of curbside enforcement.
That's good. I think, George, if you give me, do one more question and then I'll pass it back to you so we end promptly on time. But a lot of questions about the holler. Patrick, what's in it for the holler? How do we engage them? And could you speak to, I know you have already, but could you speak a little bit more to that?
It's just, as a holler, our job is to service the community. So for us, it's just doing our job. And the only really thing that's kind of like extra is, for studies like this, we set out a separate truck with a separate driver, above and beyond what's required to, help facilitate this. So, but you want to be engaged with the people that you're working with. Otherwise, none of the program is successful, because if, we're picking up contamination and not letting the town know, then the MRF's going to go after the town's going to go after us. That's just not a good thing. So you want to nip it in the bud and do everything you can to help your communities.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think with that, we better wrap up if we're going to be in time. But George, the recording will be available. What happens next?
So Keith and all, thank you so much for your inspiring work to reducing contamination while increasing diversion of the recycling stream. I'm truly impressed, and Gunther and Patrick and Jason for Needham, thanks again for the boots on the ground perspective. The new normal in 4 weeks is what I took away from your program and your study, and we look forward to more in Massachusetts. The webinar is recorded. It will be posted within a week or so. So look for that. But finally, we would like to thank you all for joining us today and continue to join us. Please look for our evaluation, and it has a specific question. If you'd like to be contacted by the Recycling Partnership, please let us know that way if that works for you. And continue to give us our feedback on how we can meet your needs in additional webinars. So that concludes today's session. And thank you all again for your time, both our speakers and our listeners.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.